Welcome back, everyone, to 123 Chess. I think it's been like a year since we've done this, and we're really stoked to be with you guys again. And we have a treat for you. We're going over each of us one of our most exciting wins against some stronger players. So, Tom, would you like to kick this off today?
Yes, this is Ego Boost Week. Just shouting our own praises, really just talking about kind of how far we've gotten just in the study process to be able to be punching up like we were in these matches. So this one for me was a tournament, a USCF-rated event that happened at the local club that I am a part of. It's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And actually, the club, which is named the Grand Rapids Chess Center, is now the largest chess club in the state of Michigan, which is super cool. Tonight was actually a big night for me and the club because tonight was actually the first night that I got to bring my my son to the club, one of my sons.
Yay.
And so yeah, the chess tradition passes on to another generation. But this here was 55 minute game with a 5-second delay over the board, so in person. And this was against my opponent was is named Stan. Stan was a candidate master actually, and I've heard him introduced at the club as, I believe it was like 3-time winner of a state amateur chess competition in Michigan. So very, very strong player. He is currently, I just looked up his rating before we started the video, 1905 for his US Chess Federation rating.
Wow.
Is certainly much higher than what my rating is. So without further ado, we'll kick off what this game looked like here. Stan usually opens with a queen opening, so he does queen 4. Luke has gotten me comfortable with queen openings because that's Luke's typical choice.
Yep.
So I know going into it that I'm going to go with a Slav defense. If we get into this, which is the Queen's Gambit, and this is where I got really excited because this is Luke's preferred line, is the Queen's Gambit. And so if you have any questions of how did I beat this person that was so much higher rated than me, it was absolutely due to the fact that I'm playing against an opponent who is using a very similar line to what Luke plays. And so I have had a lot of practice with this. And that was just good fortune on my part that the highest rated person in this tournament just happened to be paired with me and happened to be playing a line that I had studied the heck out of. So I go into my Slav defense, and from here I go into this. If you're seeing on my board, it says Slav defense modern line. I have been told, I've heard this called the chameleon defense, or chameleon variation of the Slav. So we kick off here. The reason I'm getting that A pawn out is actually it becomes quite necessary to get that A pawn out in order to bring my bishop out into the game, because we have that nasty move that white can threaten by bringing the queen out to B3. It's simultaneously attacking this pawn here on B7, as well as the pawn in the middle of the board on D5. And so if I'm moving that bishop out, if I move it out early without moving this pawn out, then I don't have any way to defend that pawn really without moving the bishop back, which is just a waste of time. And so instead, the idea is that the rook usually comes up to defend that position within this variation here. So we kind of see all of that transpire here. This kind of normal development here. There we go. So these coming out. I really like to bring out this pawn because it creates a nice sort of retreat square for both my bishop and my knight. They kind of trade out going into there as needed.
Nice prophylactic move.
Yep. We're almost through development here. Okay, so now you see the queen coming out. The rook cannot come here to defend because the bishop is on that diagonal. But just like I stated, as is common in this line, the rook comes up to a7 to defend.
Such a unique way. Like that's such a, you don't see that often, but it's all built around like it you know, the opening is, you're aware that that's how you're going to play.
Yes. And that's, you know, this isn't also the most common line for playing against the Queen's Gambit. It's one that I am very comfortable with. I have studied, I like it. But already I know that I'm probably playing a line that my opponent isn't as familiar with. And, you know, having studied it as much as I have at this point, I'm feeling like I've got a little bit of an advantage there. So he does this. I you know, just continue my development. So he's putting his knight forward. I put my knight forward. And you see he's starting to launch an attack on the king's side here, which is pretty aggressive. I mean, if you look at sort of his pawn structure right now, he's got this nice little setup here. These coming forward, challenging this bishop. And I think the really obvious move here is, you know, something in terms of, I mentioned that I freed up that space to retreat to if I needed to. But this is kind of where I made a big decision. So again, I knew that I was punching up here. And I knew up until now, we're probably in a relative point of comfort still for my opponent. I said that this is not, you know, the most common line in the world, but I'm sure he's seen similar games to this in just, you know, playing against the Slav. Well, there are lines similar to what we have done here, specifically in a game that I played with Luke and did a review on, where a knight sacrifice ends up happening here, because with the knight sacrifice that ends up happening, you end up opening some lines that make it so this queen's placement just gets really bad, because you end up having a knight on this spot attacking this queen. It needs to go somewhere, and it doesn't have a lot of options in terms of where it can go. Now, I knew this was a line, and so I was looking for it. And again, this was my advantage of my opening prep here. But that being said, I did evaluate the position and I saw it, okay, like I know that this line is out there. I know it's a thing. If I do go with that attack, am I getting the queen? Am I really getting the compensation that I need out of it? And what I really ended up gathering is, you know, his queen actually does have a pretty nice retreat square, and it can come back to its starting position. So I wasn't going to just like, I wasn't going to come out with just an ultimate winning position from this, but I looked at this and I said, you know, I'm going to pick up 2 pawns in this exchange. But more than that, I am going to take hold of some initiative here, for one. And for 2, I also said, I know that this is at least going to take my opponent outside of their comfort zone. Nobody went the move that I end up going with, which is this one here.
And by the way, guys, this is called formally this is Zwischenzug. So that's an intermezzo move. It's not what you'd expect. You'd expect Tom to move away his bishop so he didn't, get it taken by a pawn, but instead he creates a greater threat in between, doing something about that. So it's pretty awesome.
And from this position, I've basically forced Stan's hand here because that queen is being threatened. The obvious move, really the only move on the board, is to capture that knight. But now I get to come back here. I am threatening that queen yet again, and this time the queen has to move. So like I said, it's kicking back to that position, which is, a fine position for the queen to be in. But like I said, I gained the initiative. And now one of the big differences here is like I've opened up this square. And so instead of retreating here, like I get to maintain some initiative, which you see me really hold on to. And, you can see the eval bar here on the side. The computer certainly did not like the move that I did. And, as I went through with Luke, kind of evaluating this game after the fact, like this was kind of a moment that we picked out and said, that was probably pretty aggressive play. It was probably a little bit more aggressive than you really want to be. And truth be told, I in the same situation again, I don't know that I would do it again. But it did work out for me. So I bring my bishop up there, which does force the trade here. But I liked the idea of getting. I thought that was just a beautiful placement for my knight.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, especially because he's done what he's started with the kingside attack there. So now that kingside attack, which was, this nice strong attack coming on the king side, is starting to look like a little bit of a liability for him because I have started to really encroach on his territory. And now because he already attacked on that side, he doesn't, castling on that side isn't creating that nice strong defense that he'd really be more comfortable with. In even his queen position on D1, that's also preventing him from, considering castling on the queen side, which he might want to do, given the fact that he's launching a king side attack at this point, and he's wrecked the pawn structure on that side. So, yeah. So again, I'm down 1 point in material, but from my perspective, I gained a little bit of compensation in being able to do this. And this is about as far as I had seen, more or less, in my my evaluation that I had done in taking that night, which is something that is, I think, important to note, is just how far I'm going down the eval. And the eval in this too that I'm talking about, something to really recognize is I'm recognizing that this is the likely line that's going to occur because I've kind of forced these moves, right? We talked about I'm threatening that queen, so he has to do something about that queen. Taking was basically the only option with that pawn, and then after I recapture with my other knight, now I'm still threatening that queen, has to do something with it. The only logical square for him to go to was D1, so I can assume that he's going to go to D1. Which he did. And then after going to D1, I moved my bishop to E4, attacking his rook, again, creating another threat. And, it made sense at this point for him to likely take that bishop, because when you are up in material, generally you want to trade down pieces. And so I knew that was a strong likelihood that he would take that trade. But that also gave me the ability to jump into this beautiful position with my knight. But again, I'm not certain, especially of that last exchange. There were other options that he could have done, certainly on that last move. So that's a little bit of how my decision-making process goes in terms of that's as far as I want to go with my prediction in terms of where the moves are going. So from here he castles. And then from there, I jump back into this position. And I think this was one that I did regret probably more than my other moves in our evaluation, because like I already stated, like that was such a beautiful placement for the knight. I probably didn't really need to bring it back. Leaving it there was creating a lot of pressure. And so I probably could have continued down that line of making some pressure. And I didn't look at the eval bar here. I didn't look at a strong analysis. So I don't know that this would be it, but I am thinking, just looking at it right now, that might have been a better move, just because it creates some additional pressure on that king side. That'd be two pieces that were facing down that pawn, and that would protect this square too in the event that I wanted to pop my knight down. Again, I don't know if that would be the correct move by any stretch of the imagination. I haven't run it through an eval bar or anything like that, but just to give you some ideas of kind of where my head's at and how I'm thinking about this. So Stan does this, which is certainly an interesting move. I was not prepared for him doing that. It does make sense in terms of he's protection to that pawn, which is really the primary reason for popping this knight down here. I was kind of also expecting another trade to occur, but that obviously didn't happen there. But that, the reason why I'm looking for that trade too is because I thought having my bishop and my queen coming down into that nice open structure would have been really nice. So he didn't want that, does that. I castle. That gives him the opportunity to sort of like get back into the game, gain some initiative. He brings his rook over to the semi-open file. And from here, I'm just trying to now capitalize on some space and gain some space with these pawns, because I have all of my pawns at this point in time. The only piece that I have lost is my knight, and my pawns are it's set up in quite a beautiful structure, and so I'm going to continue to capitalize on that and just gain space with those pawns. And given the fact that he has his two bishops right now, like additionally, like even more important that I'm closing off that space, making it so his bishops, which are his major advantage right now, though that advantage gets lessened. So again, just taking that space, getting a nice pawn structure here. And then I move my queen over to here, which actually in my evaluation during the game, I circled this move because I was really uncomfortable sticking my queen all the way into the corner, because, the queen, one of the benefits of it is it covers so many squares.
Yep.
When you're sticking your queen in the corner, you have gotten rid of all the squares that it's actually covering. And so I'm only covering these. But what I loved about it was I'm now covering that huge diagonal. And it's especially huge because that king is already on that diagonal. And there's no piece that's in between me and that king other than my own pawn, which I could launch forward anytime I wanted. So again, I circled it because I was like, I'm a little uncomfortable. I don't know if this is the correct move, but in my evaluation after the game, I did see that that did turn out to be, I think it was the best move at the time. I'm not positive, but I know it was a pretty good move still. So then from here, I start telling myself, okay, I just want to push my pawns forward a little bit more. I did anticipate the move sequence that occurs here of him dropping down there. And then I saw that this exchange was likely to happen. It does.
It's all fallen into your preparation. I mean, like your anticipation, which is really cool.
Yeah. So now, I've got my pawns. He's got the bishops, and I've got a knight, which goes away real quick. in this position, it really makes sense to trade off that knight in this position because there's so many pawns on the board that his bishops really are becoming difficult to move around. And that knight all of a sudden in this position is looking really good. Something that I did in this game, which had come from a lot of my prep work with Luke, was actually taking with the H pawn instead of the F pawn. Once upon a time, taking with the H pawn really made me uncomfortable because I'm thinking, I'm opening that that back door to the king, because he could come down, he could form an attack on the H file with those rooks, and that's a little scary. But I've got options. I mean, shoot, I can move to F7 if I need to with my king. And now I'm moving towards the center of the board, and we're kind of anticipating at this point in time going into an end game. So yeah, game continues from there. He launches this pawn forward, and I kind of continue with my development here in terms of going for that pawn structure. I know the really didn't like my move there, didn't like the capture there, but this is where we end up. The idea here is I've got that nice pawn chain that his bishop is staring down the line of. Effectively neutralizing the power of that bishop. And now we're going to be contending over this D file, which is now completely open. And this doesn't last too long because we have a quick series of exchanges here. Both of us just saying, no, I am not going to relinquish control of that file to the other person. I'd rather nobody have it. And so that's where we are. Again, I'm not bad off in my position here because I've got that nice passed C pawn, and the pawn structure here is really making that bishop not as strong as he would really like it to be at this point in time in the game. We are really in the end game now. We quickly moved from the mid game to the end game in that series of exchanges there on the D file. So now, name of the game is really getting the kings involved.
Yep.
Now, from here is where I think it was this move that I would say Stan made probably one of the biggest errors, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah. He lost any sort of, yep. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And
a big reason why this is such a big error, and I mean, it's something to recognize, right? And so this is not a weak player. This is a USCF master candidate, current rating at 1910. I think his historic high rating was like 2,100 something. So like strong player. To make the mistake of pushing that pawn forward just shows that players of any ranking can make errors. And if you do not understand, just looking at this video with where you are now, how that's an error, then I will briefly touch on it, but I would really highly recommend diving into some endgame development, because that's where many games are won and lost, especially at the level that that we're playing at.
Oh, and also just going along with what you said about the his pawn move here, do you guys notice how the pawn structure that Tom has, his G5 pawn is insanely powerful. It's doing the work of two pawns. It's stopping his F pawn and his H pawn from doing anything. And so he basically, his opponent Stan basically secured his fate of having any productivity on that side, because he's basically said, you know what, I'm just going to give you F4, control of F4 and H4. So,
well, and and the other scary thing that he has going for him now too is when this pawn was here, my king would not be able to advance to any one of these squares. Those off limits because of those pawns. However, by pushing this pawn forward, he's taken away that square that would be attacked by this pawn. And so suddenly my king could theoretically move to that square. Now, he's going to be doing all sorts of things to still try to stop me from moving into that square, specifically with his king. But obviously, that's also not a square that his bishop is ever going to be able to prevent from going in, because he only has the light squared bishop on the board. So I capitalize on this by getting my king into this really nice position here, which is exactly what I want it to be. And he does this. And now if you're seeing the eval bar, this is where the eval bar says like, oh my gosh, like game just turned 2-point advantage for black. Great. That is perfect. If I were a grandmaster at this point in time, I'd probably just win the game. I am not. So I'm gonna give up plenty of opportunities for my own blunders for him to take this. I got really stuck here in this position because I sat there and I stared at this for the longest time, and I was like, well, I can't move to d4, right? That's where I want to go with my king. I can't move there. I don't really see a way to be productive right now. Now, the winning move here that I did not see was moving this pawn forward.
It seems so weird, but yeah.
It does seem super weird. It seems super weird because the idea is like, well, couldn't he just take it? He could just take it, right? But I think we get into problems with the take because from here, the king can actually go.
It's so crazy.
d4. And this becomes really problematic now because from here, what do you do? Like, what do you do from the perspective of white? Capturing is going to be problematic because when you capture here, now all of a sudden that bishop falls. This a pawn is going to be golden on its way up there, and this king is not going to be able to get in front of this pawn in time to stop this king from capturing it or minimally blocking its advance.
Yeah, and the idea of you being the one who has the outside passed pawn versus your opponent having the inside, it's easier to get, to snatch a pawn and get back to the, middle than it is to go all the way to the side and then try to come back to the middle. So you have the better pawn.
And that's something that we've kind of talked about too in our recent gameplay development too, is recognizing that the end game, we talk about at the beginning, you're trying to control the center of the board and those center pawns are what are so critical. But in the end game, actually those outside pawns end up becoming like so much more powerful in a lot of different ways. Now, when we're talking about like getting like end-to-end, and if you're exchanging off, like if you've got a choice between keeping an outside pawn and keeping a middle pawn, usually I'm going to take the outside pawn because you're going to run some risks. You can run into some problems with some issues with drawing on the outside pawns. But the outside pawns certainly have a lot of advantage going into that game. And all that depends on structure too. Again,
yep.
A million things. There are a million things in the game, and this is where things are won and lost.
Yep.
So that was not the line that I did not find that line. So instead I backed up my king. He backs up his king. We do a little dance here. I do this, which this seemed great to me because I'm like, okay, I took that position. However, you see, instead of having that 2-point advantage here, now we're at a dead draw, is what the engine says. And that's because where do I go now? Where do I?
Right.
And that became really problematic for me. Now, I ended up doing here, I believe, what I should not have done. What I should have done here, the engine is recommending A5, but I think we end up getting into, just a lot of dancing that ends up happening.
Yep.
If we go by what the engine recommends. Instead, I thought to myself, okay, well, I've got this pawn that's forward and I'm going to push it. Big mistake. This was a huge mistake. And this was my biggest takeaway that I had during the game, actually, was this pawn push, because this pawn was doing so much for me. in terms of preventing that, that king advance, and really like, locking that bishop down. Obviously, you already saw the attack that it really wanted me to do, pushing toward the side of the board, right, with the b pawn advance. I did not do that. Instead, I went here for this quick win, right, that you'll see there, right? And so I'm like, okay, cool. I pushed that out of the way. But I mean, you can look real quick. I don't have any way of pushing that. I can't push that pawn forward right now and think I'm gonna get a queen.
Right.
This king's too close. So now I'm just, okay, now I'm doing that move that doesn't accomplish a heck of a lot, other than, I'm getting it off that square. Well, now that bishop pops in there, and what a great spot for that bishop to be, because now it's covering all of those squares. Now I can't advance any of those pawns. And this is where things get really bad for me. So if you see the eval bar, it's skyrocketed to Stan's advantage here. And so now I'm thinking, okay, well, I've just got to kind of defend this as best I can. And now I've given Stan the out, right, by pushing this pawn forward. Again, it was that same thing that I had criticized him for. Now I've done it to myself. Now I've given him the ability to advance that king into my position, which I really don't want.
Instant gratification hurts.
It does. And so we get this. Stan does this, which basically forces my hand into taking it with emphasis. I'm going to lose some pawns here. That's for sure. The one hope that I'm sort of holding on to at this point is, okay, maybe I can make Stan so busy capturing my pawns on the A file that I can get behind his line and start gobbling up some of his pawns on his side of the board. The good news is all of my pawns, these are all on the black squares. So his bishop, even though it gets to move faster, isn't going to be able to come back and start taking those. The only thing, if I don't move those pawns, the only thing that can take him right now is his king. So this sort of dance happens here. Like that. I'm looking for the opportunity, which was going to come, right, from sacrificing those pawns to the king, to be able to move my king up. That's where we are, right? So far, this is sort of a plan. If you look at the eval bar, you're saying, I already know the outcome of this game. I end up winning.
You don't know.
How do I come back from winning in this with this sort of advantage that he has? So we get here, here, and
using that pawn. Something
really important to note. I said this was a 55-minute game with a 5-second delay. Now, 5-second delay is not 5 bonus seconds. So if you've played on chess.com, you're probably really familiar with bonus seconds. That makes it so, if you get 5 bonus seconds and you only use up 2 seconds, you get 3 seconds added to your clock. Well, with a 5-second delay, you never get time added to your clock. You only get it removed. Now you get an additional 5 seconds each move, but if you only use 2 seconds, that 3 additional seconds is gone and never recovered. Now at this point in time in the game, I had about 5 minutes left on my clock, and Stan was hovering at about 20 to 30 seconds on his clock. That's a lot of time pressure. And so getting him down there is something that I really was counting on. But he had big decisions to be making along this way. He had some big calculations to make and just wasn't using his clock as effectively as I was. So I made this play here. And we end up seeing this happen. And that was the blunder that lost the game for Stan. And that seems like a really obvious move to do. Like doing that seems like, if you're just looking at it, You know, if you're you know, even a 1500 level player, and you don't have a lot of time to analyze the position, the instant idea is, well, that's a pawn. That's a free pawn. It's not defended by anything. I can take that pawn, right? But the problem, when you take that pawn, it's allowing this capture to happen. You go here. After coming here, there's no way to stop the advancement of my pawns. You take, but after moving that forward, there's nowhere to go. This right here actually is where Stan ultimately just ran out of time. And he knew he had messed up, because immediately after this, so Stan runs out of time at this position, and he says, can we go back to that position a couple moves earlier? And so we did. We backed it up to this position, and he said, yeah, I think I messed up here, because I think if I had just moved the bishop out of the way,
yeah, just stay on that diagonal,
I think I would have been okay. And you know, we took the time to look through it, and yeah, sure enough, that was solid. Like, that was the thing to do. And I had looked at it prior to, because like I said, I had 5 minutes on my clock. And so when I got to this position, I stared at it for a while, and I was like, this move is coming. I know it's coming. And I saw he had the option. He had the option to not take, and I didn't have a win. He was going to win the game if he didn't take. But I knew that the natural move would be to capture there. And that's what he ultimately did. So, you know, that's a hard fought battle. It's what punching up looks like. And it really goes to show that any level player can make a mistake. It's the importance of time control, which actually, if you go back to like our first video that we made, I'm pretty sure one of the first things that I said I was weakest at was playing with a clock.
Yep.
A lot of time pressure. Well, I practiced a ton by honestly playing a lot of bullet games. And a lot of you know, very strong players will tell you don't play a lot of bullet, because bullet doesn't help with a lot of you know higher critical thinking and things like that. I've obviously been playing a lot of classical time controls as well to work on those sorts of things, but the reason why I've played so much bullet has really been to focus intently on how to operate well under time pressure. And I can't say I'm great at bullet now, but I can say I have grown to be much more comfortable with that stress of that clock management of my time, as this game really highlights, because I think that's the biggest thing that allowed me to win this game.
That's awesome, Tom. Yeah, well played, and all the way to the end. And that earlier position was really instructive with one of your biggest takeaways you said with the bishop or the pawn move, where you allowed his bishop in your space. That was huge, and that the knight sack was just so fun. I mean, that's like, I would be so, especially me as a positional player, that freaks me out to try something like that. That was great.
I'm sure it freaked him out. I'm sure he saw that and was just like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
I was saying the same thing in my mind, but
that's awesome.
I'm bold enough to do it.
Awesome. Well, truth be told, Tom, I accidentally somehow closed out of the other game. Can I re-invite you to my board?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you. Let me know once you're already in it. Okay, I'm clicking invite now.
Except I'm going to have to.
Perfect. Okay.
It says USCF tournament though.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I accidentally lost the ability to be in the other one.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Did you want to add anything else in yours, or was that kind of?
No, I think I'm good there. But I believe I have to make you host.
I think we're good actually with how this is. The only thing, if you want to just flip the board around.
Flipping the board.
Okay, cool. So a little context with my game, just like Tom gave you with his. So this game was played in my first and only so far in my life USCF kind of classical time control match. And because of the interesting dynamic with COVID, this one actually ended up being a Zoom tournament where we all had to be showing ourselves on Zoom while at the same time playing a game. And they used chess.com, but it was USCF rated. So it was very interesting. And they the time control is super long. It was 60 minutes on each of our clock plus a 30-second increment. So as Tom mentioned, his, you had a what, 5 second delay, I think. Yeah. So like he was saying, 30-second increment. That means every single turn you get 30 seconds added to your clock. So you can imagine, I mean, there were 5 games in the tournament. It took a whole weekend. And this game that I'll be showing you here is game 2. I ended up getting 10th place out of, I think, 38 people. And I placed first in my category, which was unrated, since it was my first and only tournament. And so, yeah, super exciting. Lot of sharp lines. And this guy, he wasn't rated at 1900, something like the player Tom played here, but he was an arena FIDE master. So he was a very strong player. And he ended up, he would have placed, I think, one of the top 8, I calculated it with, if I hadn't ended up beating him. Spoiler alert, I beat him here. So we'll see how this plays out. So I will not digress any further. Let's get right into it. Okay, so he starts with the English. Tom and I have had a little experience. You may have noticed a few games on our channel where we use the English as a means to learn more. So I used to go with this move and then Fiend Ketaween right away. However, I decided to go with the symmetrical variation because I've seen a little bit of reviews on symmetrical being a solid way to respond. So I haven't done it much, but then again, I don't really know what to do against English. For me, the English is kind of like out of opening prep almost all the time because you never know what you're going to get. You get some Fiend Kettle bishops, you kind of got like lines going everywhere, and you just kind of, it's a fight for the center, really. So yeah, so he goes, standard knight move. I follow suit because I'm, kind of going the Fianchetto classical, it's basically just the symmetrical. So he goes here, and I'm getting ready to Fiend Kettle my bishop. And then he does the same. So pretty just solid chess here. Okay, so after I move here, what is my intention? Well, it's pretty obvious. I don't want to keep this pawn here. So my intention is for me to move this pawn up because otherwise it's kind of an awkward position with a weak dark square. And well, you'll see in a moment that as soon as that happens, so he castles, and then this is my first critical moment. The reason why is because I saw first of all, I'm not used to this. And so I got scared. I'm like, okay, what if he goes here with his knight and then tries to plop in here with a free check, and then he could take my bishop and also get me so I can't castle. I was afraid of that. The problem is my plan was to bring this knight out and then move the pawn up. Very simple plan, and it's pretty typical in this position. But the problem is I just didn't calculate. Like, okay, so yeah, let's say he does that. And what I ended up doing in the game is this move. But in retrospect, I realized that what in the world, if his knight pops here, what's so scary about that? Why don't I just still go with my plan? And so what I ended up doing here is this move. But like I said, let's just say I did this real quick, and then he goes here. Well, then what's to stop this? It's fine. Like my queen is now guarding that square. He's not going to do any little maneuver. And eventually, if I want, I could even kick him. So, I mean, yeah, so this is just, it wasn't a blunder I made, but it was certainly a miscalculation based out of fear, which Tom and I have talked about how, like, don't let fear drive your gameplay because it can really get you into muddy waters. So let's go back.
You're just too used to me launching my outside pawns forward one, and you're just gotta jump on that bandwagon.
Exactly. So, and to be fair, I was kind of scared about opening up the center. I like closed games, so I knew that would do that, but it would still have been fine. So as gameplay continued, we get to this point where he's trying to he's trying to keep me from making progress on that side. and we kind of just block it. Okay, so it's obvious what he would like to do next. He would like to advance this pawn here to stake his claim to the center and try to contest my control of that square. So what I ended up doing is just going right away. I saw like, okay, he's going to attack in the center. Maybe I should do it first. So then the continuation is pretty obvious. Like we both did pretty decent moves here, nothing real exciting. So now all the pressure is on this pawn, as we'll see here soon. But okay, so then he's like, all right, you're going to open it up. I'm going to open up all the way. So take, the fireworks happen. And as the dust settles, I decide I'll castle. And okay, now is where the sharp play begins. This is where I start to get a little bit uneasy because I wanted it to be just kind of a straightforward game. Nobody likes having their knight pinned to their queen early like this. You always have to just, it's not always a bad thing, but you just have to be careful because if they can use that pin in their favor later, you could be in danger. So I decide the first thing I should do is probably at least guard this pawn again. So, but then the next move, okay, I really struggled in this position because I was calculating like, okay, what if he takes here, and then I take here? Well, then all of a sudden he has two pieces hitting this guy. And it's not necessarily dangerous here, but it is something that has to be calculated really well. So I ended up deciding that my best move, which I looked at the engine afterward, Tom, and I did find out this was either what. So the two best moves were essentially I could either move my queen here or what I ended up doing. So either one is fine because either one either gets out of the pin or gives an extra defender for a piece. Anyway, so I did one of the decent options. Then this happens. And I'm like, oh, great. So I saw what was coming. I saw that as soon as that happened, I'm like, okay, the tactical trade has begun. And now I have to figure out after I take him, because that's kind of the obvious move, then he does this. And I'm like, what is he seeing that I'm not seeing? And so I really got scared here because I'm like, surely he would not have taken that if he didn't already calculate that if I were to just do the obvious take, then then he would have come out ahead like that. I figured he had to have seen something. But what I realized after is he was bluffing. Like this wasn't actually an attack. It's an illusion, and I'll show you why. So again, let's go through the obvious scenarios here. So if I take, right, then, and he takes, pick one, Tom, which one are you going to go for?
Let's take the rook first.
Okay, so rook goes first, then I take his pawn. Okay, now what? See, here's the problem. What I didn't realize is I was totally fine because if he takes, well, then guess what? I get a rook and look at how the dust clears and I am up a piece. But conversely, if he decides he wants to keep his rook, well, then guess what? I get my bishop back and I'm still up a piece, and I'm still, I'm up a piece. And now he does have two rooks, but the bishop pair in this position is pretty stinking deadly. So I'm still better, far better. And now if we go back again to the other one, so we just looked at if if the rook was taken. Now let's look at the bishop was taken, which the computer actually likes better, I think. And guess what? No surprise, the dust settles and I'm still better. So either way, so again, no matter how you look at it, no matter which way the trades go, his attack with that knight was really just bluffing or miscalculation. It was not scary at all. But of course, in the game, I let the fear get the best of me, and I went with this. I mean, not horrible. My whole idea, what was my idea? Well, I know the queen is guarding all this, and I know the queen's guarding all this, and I'm attacking this twice, and I know that once he moves his knight, I can get a free pawn. So, that was my thoughts. It's not horrible. It's just not exciting, and it's a missed opportunity, is what it was. I could have had an easy win potentially, and you know, I mean, like what Tom said earlier, you know, someone could be a master level player, or even in his case, he wasn't quite master, but you know, you could be a strong player and still make blunders, still make mistakes. And if the opponent does not capitalize on that when they have the chance to, it's over. So let's continue with how the game went. So he moves his knight out of the way, of course. And like I said, I got the pawn. Now, it would have been advantageous for him probably to just snap this off right away, but he didn't. So then I'm like, okay, well, if you didn't do that, I'm not going to let you take him, which is, it's kind of hard to know what to do because I saw this pawn was hanging here. And because of that, I'm like, well, I'm guarding the pawn. At least I have a battery going on, you know, I'm attacking this square if in case he tries to attack. It is kind of a bummer. I'm really awkward because this rook is still hiding back here. So it gets really interesting really fast. So he moves his knight back, and I'm like, all right, fine. Then I'm going to move my bishop back where it belongs, because now that you know it's guarded by its own pawn. So then, so then he moves back here again, and I move back. So I'm like, okay, do you want to really just kind of do this dance? And he's like, nope, I don't. So he decides he's going to continue with trying to make an attack. Now, what did he see here? Well, check this out. If you know, now that he has this attack going on this square, that's going to be a check. If I take him, then all of a sudden, now he's got another check with his rook, and now this guy is pinned to my rook. So it's pretty uncomfortable for me, and so I ended up just doing a simple like guarding with the pawn, and he does do what I just said. So I actually thought about this for quite some time. And I really, truly, I actually didn't look at this in the engine, but I really, truly think that what I moved was kind of the best option. And that was just to do this.
I like that.
And it's very simple what I was doing. Like I said, I wanted to maintain, control of that back rank because I didn't want to have any problems with not being able to get my other bishop and rook out. So after I did that, he moves his queen back. And I move my bishop. Again, I'm trying to get my rook out. I'm trying to get some productivity on the queen side. So he moves his, okay, now this gets really crazy. Look at real closely what is going on here, because as soon as let's pretend I didn't move my bishop there. As soon as he moves his knight here, I have one option other than losing my queen. That is to move here. And then it's a discovery on my king. So that is a huge, I mean, I basically would have lost the game on the spot. So I saw that my only option was to get my bishop there so that it would be guarding. And consequently, look at how trapped his queen is. So this actually turned out, you know, it took a while for me to find that move, but once I found it, I realized that not only does that, you know, parry the threat, it also really puts him in an awkward boat because his queen is the only other piece guarding his knight. So he kind of pulls a, you know, kamikaze almost. He's like, I gotta parry the threat on my queen. And so this is another, like we talked about in Tom's game, this is a Zwischenzug and in between move. So I go here, I'm still attacking that queen and I'm still attacking that knight. So he moves the queen back. And now this was fun because now I disconnected his queen from his knight. So again, I'm continuing to put the pressure on that knight so that he can't move it, or so that he can't, you know, protect it. So then play continues here. He's like, I gotta guard that knight. And arguably my best move in this position, which I didn't realize at the time, was likely to move my queen. I think it was moving my queen right here. But it doesn't really matter because what I ended up doing was perfectly fine. I'm just very simple. I'm attacking it twice. So then he does what is the best move in this position. He just sacks the rook so that he can at least get another pawn by doing another move before he loses the knight. So that's, you know, he did as good as one could do in that position, but I'm still pretty excited here, right? Like this is like really cool that I'm now, you know, very confidently you know, in the winning position here if I can maintain this. So I decided that the simplest thing to do in this. Now, if you looked at an engine, it would tell you things like, I should have gone here right away. Fair enough, but I honestly don't think that what I did was a bad idea. Because I want to get rid of that rook, right? I mean, I understand my light squares are a little bit, iffy, and I have to be really careful. But I'm like, okay, let's get rid of that other piece. I'm already ahead. So
Well,
then
and the scary thing is the only scary thing you have in this position right now is you don't have any pawns defending your king right now. And so like with it being as open as it is,
yep,
with the right next to it, like you don't want to allow that opportunity for another piece to somehow come into the mix and create some real scary threats.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, well said. I couldn't have said it better. Like that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm just trying to simplify it down. That's the whole mindset. Whatever I can do to simplify it down. I got so excited I was ahead and against a strong player on game 2 of this tournament. So yeah, so then he, does the only move he could do. And then Tom and I talked about this after, because I was so excited after I got done with this game. It was done the last game of day 1, and I called Tom up and we were talking about it. And one of the things we were chuckling about is how in this position it's clear that I have another piece to get in the action, my rook, and I also am pinning his bishop, so he only has a queen to work with. But then I do this, and I'm like, I just pinned that piece for a reason. I didn't just get rid of a rook. I made his bishop, unable to move. And now I do this? Like, what in the world did I have in mind? So then what happens? Well, then it gets really scary because then all of a sudden the exact thing I was worried about with him coming in here happens. And well, there's really only one move to prevent from checkmate. So I do it. And all right, so now I'm getting scared too, because, this guy just wants to find his way down here. And I'm still fine, but it's getting a little concerning. And I'm like, I'm trying to think, what's the fastest way to like simplify this down? I got to get rid of his bishop. So he goes here. Now he's attacking this pawn twice, right? You see it with both pieces. I don't want to lose that. So, but I know it's going to happen. Okay, now I'm like, okay, let's trade queens. Anything to get this simplified. He, of course, doesn't, because that would not be wise. And now I pin him, and he checks me, and I block, and he checks me again, and he's trying to get a repetition for a draw. Nope. Then he moves out here, and finally, I see my opportunity. There's no way to parry this. So I'm definitely going to get that queen exchange, or else he's going to lose a bishop. And well, he chooses not to opt for that. He wants to keep the queen on the board. I guess there's, you can make, it's not the best, but you can make an argument that could have potential. And I mean, he's already losing, but so I take it. This should be a clear win from here. And as soon as I get my pieces lined up and ready to attack, at this position, it's pretty obvious. He can't attack my queen because the bishop pin, and checkmate is looming just around the corner, and my opponent resigned on game 2. So I think, my key takeaways real quick would be, number 1, I have this happen in the opening a lot, but I need to be more careful. It was long time control, right? So this move here, this move didn't do anything. It's not like it's bad, but why did I not carefully calculate? What am I afraid of? I'm afraid of this, but why? Because if I move my knight here, I just continue with my plan and I'm fine. And it also would have prevented, I would argue I lost a tempo in doing this. So that my first takeaway is, don't let fear get the best of you, especially in the opening when you're trying to be productive. Don't lose tempo in the process of getting, reactive. Instead, you be the one who's in the driver's seat and just continue your development. And I would have been one move further in my tempo. My next takeaway is, as things moved around here, okay, when there's a sharp position like this, and I did calculate I'd be fine after I moved my rook there, as soon as this exchange happens and he opts for the very not obvious, like aggressive move, I should, if I just calculate it simply out, like how should your mind work in a situation like this, especially when you have a lot of time to think? Well, I should have just systematically gone through it. Okay, what are the obvious options? Well, option 1, take here. And like we just went through before, right? And then you go through that series, what does it look like when the board, when the dust settles? And then, also look at the other one. What if you take with the queen? That would be stupid, but but so you can throw that out. So really, it's only one thing. All I had to do is calculate if I take with this guy, and then look at each option of whether he takes my bishop or whether he takes my rook. And if I had calculated it out, I would have seen that he either miscalculated or he's totally bluffing and is just hoping I'll be scared. And really, it's not a free pawn. It's a poison pawn, what we call. So that was my second takeaway is, especially in a sharp position, pick the most obvious lines, like the lines that are the most logical, and just calculate it out a couple moves. And chances are you'll find that if you can visualize what it'll look like after those exchanges, then you've already succeeded in securing your confidence in what you're going to do next. And then my last and final takeaway is at the very end here, as we saw, when all the chaos was done, and I now somehow went to the beginning instead of the end of the game, is right here. When I first got to the point where I had exchanged off the rooks, okay, all of my goal was being accomplished. And then I got to the point of this. My last takeaway is, okay, when you've accomplished something like this, look clearly and carefully at what other options you have to be productive on the board without losing your clamp on the position. And if I did that, it would have been so much easier for me to actually like get more pieces in the action. I could have started, bringing my rook in and eventually getting some pieces attacking, this pawn here. It would have just been great. And so, yeah. And my last takeaway was, man, don't give up in trying to actually play a USCF rated match. Like that, for me, this was like literally my first and only. I think I might do it again this summer, but I think I definitely, it encouraged me that I was able to do so well, that I really can compete in these things and actually come away with some real helpful learning tips.
And I will say, if anybody watches this and plays chess at all, honestly, getting USCF rating and like playing in officially ranked tournaments, it might be a little scary, but there's no rating where you're too low rated to do it. Like, jump in. It's a great learning opportunity. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it was a ton of fun for each of us in our respective tournaments. And if you're scared to do it, don't be. I mean, in chess, it's one of those beautiful games where every time you lose, it's a learning opportunity. That's the whole point of our channel, right? Every loss is even a win in that regard. So anything else you want to add at the end, Tom?
I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. It was a pleasure to show you these games and our exciting victories, but also use it as an opportunity to learn some principles along the way and encourage you in your game so you can share your victories as well. Well, see you guys next time, but until then, continue to improve your game.